I remove cataracts for a living. Surgery pays my mortgage. It puts food on my family's table. It's the reason I studied for 11 years after high school, and the reason I stand in an operating room almost every single week of my life. So what I'm about to tell you should be the last thing coming out of my mouth. Because if what's happening right now in a quiet clinical trial in California actually works, thousands of surgeons like me could lose a huge portion of our income overnight. And yet here I am, telling you about it anyway, because you deserve to know. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, the very first American patients are being enrolled in a clinical trial for an eye drop. Not a supplement, not a vitamin, not another social media miracle cure. A real pharmaceutical eye drop designed not just to slow cataracts down, but to possibly reverse them. Read that again. Reverse them. This isn't a laboratory experiment anymore. It's not a study in mice. It's not a rumor floating around health forums at 2 in the morning. It's a real, placebo-controlled human trial. And the very first patient was just enrolled right here in California. But before you pick up the phone and cancel your surgery scheduled for next month, there's a catch, a big one. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this catch matters more than any headline you've ever read about cataracts. Because we've been here before. We've seen the miracle cataract cure make front-page news. Back in 2015, a study came out that promised to change everything. Scientists celebrated, patients cried tears of hope. And then, when other researchers tried to repeat that same study, something happened that almost no one talked about publicly. I'll tell you exactly what it was in a few minutes. Meanwhile, at this very moment, thousands of people across the world are literally dripping castor oil into their eyes because someone with a ring light and a phone told them it dissolves cataracts. It doesn't. And later in this video, I'm going to show you the anatomical reason why it's physically impossible. Not unlikely, impossible. So here's exactly what we're covering today. What is actually inside this new eye drop? The one crucial number the company left out of their impressive-sounding data. Why the 2015 miracle disappeared, and how to tell real cataract science from an internet lie that could permanently damage your vision. My name is Dr. Marcus. I'm a board-certified ophthalmologist, and no, before anyone asks in the comments, I'm not an AI avatar. I'm a real human being with real hands that have performed thousands of real surgeries. Now stay with me here, because to understand why an eye drop for cataracts would be such a massive deal, and why most of the so-called cures you see online literally cannot work, you first need to understand something most people have never had explained to them properly. What is a cataract actually? Behind the colored part of your eye, the iris, sits your natural lens. When you're young, that lens is remarkably, almost impossibly clear. Light passes straight through it and gets focused perfectly onto your retina. But the proteins inside that lens are given a job that borders on the miraculous. They have to stay perfectly organized, perfectly aligned, and perfectly functional for decades. Not years, decades. And as those proteins undergo the natural chemistry of aging, oxidative stress, protein modifications, gradual clumping, the architecture of the lens breaks down. Instead of passing light cleanly through, the light starts to scatter in every direction. The lens becomes cloudy. That is a cataract. And now I want you to remember the single most important anatomical fact in this entire video. The one fact that changes everything you thought you knew about cataract cures. The cataract is inside the eye, not on the surface, not in the tear film, not around the eyelids. It's inside the eye, buried deep within the lens itself. Which means that wiping your eye, rinsing it with any solution, or dripping any oil on the surface cannot mechanically wash a cataract away. It cannot penetrate into the lens at all, and I'm going to prove that to you in a way you'll never forget. Just hold on to that fact, because it's going to matter more than you realize when we get to what's happening on TikTok and Instagram right now. So what does a cataract feel like from the inside? Blurry vision that no glasses can fix. Glare that stops you from driving at night. Halos around every headlight on the highway. Colors that used to look vivid now look washed out, gray, almost sad. Prescription changes every few months that never seem to help. And today, once a cataract significantly interferes with your vision, we have exactly one established treatment: surgery. We remove the cloudy natural lens and replace it with a clear artificial one. and modern cataract surgery is extraordinarily effective. It's one of the safest procedures in all of medicine. I perform it every single week. But now imagine, just for a second, if we could treat the proteins themselves. Imagine if we could keep the lens clear from the inside. Imagine if some patients might never need to walk into an operating room at all. That would not just be a medical breakthrough. That would be a revolution in how we treat aging itself. That's the scientific opportunity sitting on the table right now. And here's where the story turns, because a company just announced something that no one in ophthalmology saw coming this soon. But before I tell you the name of that drop, and before I tell you the missing number that changes everything about the data they published, I need to tell you about the enzyme, the mutation, and the child born blind whose eyes accidentally handed scientists the key to possibly ending cataract surgery forever. And that story starts in a hospital in China. But before we get to that hospital in China, I need you to understand something first. Because if I don't, the rest of this story is going to sound like just another biotech press release you scroll past. And this is not that. This is different. On August 4th, 2026, an announcement was quietly made that most of the world completely missed. A company called Lexidus Pharma Services, in partnership with a smaller biotech named Occupire, revealed that they had just enrolled the very first American patient in a pilot study of an investigational cataract drop. The drug has a name that sounds like a serial number, DOC 20117-217, and I know that name doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but that boring string of letters and numbers could, and I want you to hear this carefully, could be the most important sequence in ophthalmology this decade. According to the report, this is a multi-center, randomized, double-masked, placebo-controlled study in people with age-related cataracts. Now, those words might sound like corporate boilerplate that you'd skim past in any pharmaceutical announcement, but they matter enormously. They matter more than you can possibly imagine, because those 4 words, randomized, double-masked, placebo-controlled, are the gold standard of scientific proof. They're the exact design features you build into a study when you're genuinely trying to find out whether a treatment actually works, rather than just designing a study that makes it look like your treatment works. There's a massive difference between those two things. And most of the miracle cures you see online could never survive this kind of trial, not for a second. And the very first patient enrolled right here in California by a practicing ophthalmologist, someone just like me. Which means somewhere in this country, right now, there is a real human being with real cataracts putting a real experimental drop into their eyes. And nobody knows yet, not even the doctors running the trial, whether that patient is receiving the actual drug or the placebo. That's how a proper study works. Now here's where it gets interesting. The drop is derived from a molecule called lanosterol. Say that word out loud once. Lanosterol. Remember it, because that single molecule is the key that unlocks this entire story, and it's connected to a discovery that made scientists across the world stop everything they were doing back in 2015. According to the company, the goal of this drop is to influence several of the biological processes that drive cataract formation in the first place. Oxidative stress, the misfolding of lens proteins, the clumping of those proteins into cloudy aggregates, and the company's ultimate hope, the moonshot they're chasing, is that this drop might not just slow cataracts, but actually reverse some of that progression. Reverse it. That's the headline. That's the sentence that could change the entire field of eye surgery. But this is where I have to pump the brakes. Hard. Because I have watched too many patients get their hopes crushed by headlines exactly like this one. An investigational treatment is not a proven treatment. Enrolling the first patient tells us the experiment has officially started. It does not, under any circumstance, tell us the experiment has succeeded. There is a canyon between those two things. And most of the general public doesn't know how deep that canyon is. Now, the company also cites what they call exploratory data from studies done in China. And this is exactly where I owe you that missing number I promised you back at the beginning of this video. Because when you look at that Chinese data, on the surface, it sounds miraculous. The company reports that somewhere between 50% and 86.4% of patients achieved 20/40 vision or better after just 12 to 24 weeks of treatment. Let that sink in for a second. Up to 86% of patients seeing at 20/40 or better after only 3 to 6 months of eye drops. If that's true, and if it holds up, cataract surgery as we know it could become almost obsolete for millions of people. But wait, there's a piece missing from that headline. A piece so critical that without it, the entire statistic falls apart. And I mean that literally. What was their vision before the treatment started? Because if a patient walked into that Chinese clinic already seeing 20/40 and walked out still seeing 20/40 6 months later, they would still be counted as a success in that statistic. That's not a lie. That's not fraud. But it is a very specific way of presenting data that makes a treatment look much more effective than it might actually be. And without that baseline number, without knowing where these patients started, that impressive-sounding 86.4% figure is essentially unreadable. It could be a miracle. Or it could be a mirage. And there are two more questions that matter even more than that missing baseline. First, does achieving 20/40 vision actually prove that a cataract was reversed? The answer is no, not necessarily. Vision can improve for many reasons unrelated to the cataract itself. Second, and this is the big one, did the treatment actually delay or eliminate the need for cataract surgery? Because at the end of the day, that is the only outcome that truly matters to you and to me. If a patient still needs surgery 6 months later, then the drop, no matter how impressive the numbers sound, has failed at its most important job. So here's my honest read as a working ophthalmologist. These are interesting early signals. They justify running a rigorous trial. They do not, in any universe, prove that we already have an effective cataract medication ready for your medicine cabinet. But now I have to take you back in time to a discovery so shocking that when it was first published, it made every eye surgeon in the world question everything they thought they knew. And it started, as I promised, with a family in China whose children were being born with cloudy eyes. The year was 2015. The journal was Nature. And if you know anything about scientific publishing, you know that Nature is not a place where speculation gets printed. It is the most prestigious scientific journal in the world. Getting a paper published there is the closest thing modern science has to being knighted. And what appeared in Nature that year sent shockwaves through the entire field of ophthalmology. A team of researchers had been studying families in China where children were being born with congenital cataracts. Imagine that for a moment. A newborn baby opening their eyes for the very first time to see their mother's face, and their tiny lenses are already clouded over, already broken, already failing before they'd ever had a chance to work. These families had passed the same devastating condition from generation to generation, and when scientists dug into their DNA, they found something extraordinary. The children who were being born with cataracts all carried a mutation in the same enzyme, an enzyme called lanosterol synthase. That enzyme's job is to help the body produce lanosterol. Remember that word from earlier? Lanosterol, the same molecule inside the eye drop being tested in California right now. Everything is connected. And the scientists asked the most obvious question in the world. If the absence of lanosterol seems to cause cataracts in these children, could adding lanosterol back into the eye reverse cataracts in adults? It was such a simple, beautiful idea, almost too beautiful. Because in science, the ideas that sound too beautiful usually turn out to be too good to be true. But this one, at least at first, looked like it was going to be different. Because when those researchers took lanosterol and applied it to lens proteins in the laboratory, something remarkable happened. The clumped, cloudy protein aggregates, the very structures that make cataracts, started to break apart. The proteins began to refold. The cloudiness started to clear. Then they took it further. They tested it on rabbits with cataracts. The rabbit lenses cleared. Then they tested it on dogs who had developed cataracts naturally, the same way our grandparents do. And the dogs' cataracts also improved. That was the moment the entire world of ophthalmology held its breath. Because if you could pharmacologically restore the organization of lens proteins with a simple drop, you would never need to remove the lens surgically again. You could treat the biology of cataract formation itself. You could treat the aging of the eye. For a field of medicine that hadn't seen a paradigm shift in decades, this was earth-shattering. So why, 10 years later, am I still doing cataract surgery every single week? Why isn't every ophthalmologist in America writing prescriptions for lanosterol drops? Well, this is where scientific medicine parts ways violently from social media medicine. One exciting study is the beginning of a scientific question. It is not the end of one. And what happened after that 2015 paper was published is a lesson that every single person watching this video needs to hear. Because other researchers around the world did exactly what good science requires. They tried to reproduce the results. And the picture got complicated very, very fast. In one study, researchers gathered 40 lens nuclei from real human cataracts, the actual cloudy lenses that had been removed during real cataract surgeries. Real patients, real disease, not artificially induced cataracts in laboratory animals. They exposed some of these human cataracts to lanosterol and others to a control solution. And then they watched, and waited, and measured. And what they found was crushing. Lanosterol did not reverse the optical opacity of those real human cataracts. It didn't clear them. It didn't dissolve them. It didn't do what the original Nature paper had promised. In another research group, scientists examined lanosterol and related compounds using both experimentally induced cataracts and human lens material. And again, they could not demonstrate the dramatic clearing that everyone in the field had been hoping for. Now hold on. Because before you conclude that lanosterol is a total dead end, you need to hear the other side, because that's not the whole story either. Other laboratory experiments have shown that lanosterol and related compounds actually can affect isolated human cataract aggregates. There are signals in the data, whispers of possibility. And another compound called VP1001 has produced measurable improvements in lens transparency and optical quality in mouse models. So this field is not simply lanosterol works versus lanosterol doesn't work. That's the kind of oversimplified binary thinking that fuels bad science journalism. The honest, boring, complicated truth is this: the biology looks plausible. Some experiments are encouraging. Others have failed spectacularly. Getting the drug into the human lens has proven to be harder than anyone imagined, and definitive human clinical evidence has been missing this entire time. Which is precisely why this new human trial happening right now in California matters so much. Because for the first time, we might actually get a real answer. But there's one more problem that almost nobody outside of my field ever talks about, and it might be the biggest problem of all. It's the reason so many promising eye drops have failed at the last hurdle, no matter how brilliant the chemistry was in the laboratory. Putting a molecule into an eye drop is relatively easy. Any pharmaceutical chemist can do it. But getting enough of that molecule from the surface of the eye, across the cornea, through the front chamber of the eye, into the lens itself, and then into the exact microscopic region of that lens where the damaged protein lives, is one of the hardest delivery problems in all of medicine. Because remember, the lens has no blood vessels. None. There is no highway to deliver the medication. It has to diffuse. It has to find its own way. And what waits for it at the end of that journey is not what you might think. Because an aging human lens is nothing like the protein solutions used in laboratory experiments. And that difference is where hope goes to die. An older human lens is not the same as a protein solution in a test tube. It is not the same as a mouse lens. It is not the same as a rabbit lens. It is not even the same as the dog lens where lanosterol first showed such promising results. A dense, mature human cataract that has been accumulating protein damage for 6, 7, sometimes 8 decades of life is an entirely different biological target than the early, soft opacities studied in most laboratory experiments. Which means, and this is critical, if cataract drops eventually work, timing could be everything. Everything. The future of this treatment probably isn't a drop that magically turns a completely white, mature cataract crystal clear overnight. That's a fantasy. The first genuinely useful cataract medication will almost certainly work by slowing an early cataract before it becomes severe, or by delaying its progression by years, or by working best on one very specific type of cataract while doing nothing for another type. And you know what? Even that would be an unbelievable accomplishment. Even that would change medicine. Even that would spare millions of people from ever needing to see the inside of an operating room. But now we need to talk about something else, because I promised you at the beginning of this video that I would explain why one particular internet cure is not just wrong, but physically, anatomically, absolutely impossible. And I keep my promises. Castor oil. You've seen the videos. You know exactly the ones I'm talking about. Someone with perfect lighting and a soothing voice looking directly into the camera and saying, "Put castor oil in your eyes before bed and your cataracts will dissolve." My grandmother did it. My vision cleared up in 3 weeks. I canceled my surgery. Doctors don't want you to know this. And here's the truth. The clean, uncomfortable, evidence-based truth. There is currently zero convincing clinical evidence that castor oil prevents cataracts, dissolves cataracts, or reverses cataracts. None. Zero. And you already know the anatomical reason to be skeptical because I told it to you in the first 3 minutes of this video. Remember? The cataract is inside the eye, deep inside the lens. Castor oil, when placed on the surface of the eye, interacts only with the tear film, the eyelids, and the outer ocular surface. It does not penetrate the cornea in any meaningful concentration. It does not enter the anterior chamber of the eye. It absolutely does not reach the lens. It is physically incapable of getting to the cataract. It's like trying to fix a broken engine by polishing the outside of your car. It doesn't matter how much oil you use. It doesn't matter how consistent you are. It doesn't matter how much you believe in it. The mechanism is anatomically impossible. Now let me be fair, because I always try to be fair. Castor oil has actually been legitimately studied in ophthalmology. This is important. Properly prepared, sterile, pharmaceutical-grade castor oil formulations have been investigated for treating oil gland dysfunction of the eyelids, which is called meibomian gland dysfunction. There is real research on castor oil being applied to the eyelids for a condition called blepharitis, which is an inflammation of the eyelid margins. So when a patient sits in my office and tells me, "Doctor, I used castor oil and my eyes genuinely felt better," I don't dismiss them. I don't tell them they imagined it, because they may genuinely have improved their tear film, and a better tear film can absolutely make your vision feel subjectively clearer, especially first thing in the morning. But here's the trap. Improving your tear film is not the same thing as clearing the lens of your eye, and that distinction gets completely, utterly lost in every viral social media video about this topic. Less dryness plus a clearer feeling of vision does not equal a dissolved cataract. It never has, it never will. And now please hear this part carefully. Do not, under any circumstances, put household or cosmetic castor oil directly into your eyes. Any product that goes into the eye requires pharmaceutical formulation and true sterility. We have seen absolutely horrifying cases in the last few years of patients developing serious eye infections from contaminated eye drops purchased online. Some of those patients lost their eyes. Some of them died. Natural does not mean sterile. Organic does not mean safe. And an ocular surface treatment is not, and never will be, a cataract treatment. So if castor oil isn't the answer, what else is actually being seriously investigated? Because this new California trial isn't the only serious attempt happening right now. There's a quiet arms race unfolding across pharmaceutical labs around the world. And I want to give you the honest, unfiltered scorecard. There's a compound called EDTA, and there has been a randomized human trial of a 2.6% EDTA eye drop. In a small subgroup analysis of just 41 eyes with early cataracts, the treated eyes showed better contrast sensitivity outcomes than placebo after 4 months. The researchers also reported measurable changes in the density of the lens itself. Intriguing? Yes. But it was a small subgroup analysis with a substantial placebo response, and it did not demonstrate that a drop could reliably reverse a visually significant cataract. Then there's VP1001, the compound I mentioned earlier. Rather than acting as a simple antioxidant, it's designed to stabilize lens proteins so they're less likely to clump in the first place. The mouse results were encouraging. Some lenses got clearer, optics improved measurably, but it has not been proven in human cataract trials at all. And there's an entire next generation of cataract drops being explored right now. Stronger antioxidants, anti-clumping compounds, drugs specifically targeting the biological pathway behind diabetic cataracts. But one particular experimental treatment, published in 2025, is so wildly futuristic that when I first read it, I had to read it twice to be sure I was understanding it correctly. Imagine for a moment that instead of putting a drug into the eye, you could genetically instruct the eye to produce its own drug, forever. Not just for a day, not just for a week, but permanently. That is the exact idea behind a 2025 study that delivered mRNA, the same class of molecule used in the COVID vaccines, directly into the lens of the eye. And the goal wasn't to fight a virus. The goal was to teach the lens itself to manufacture its own supply of lanosterol, from the inside out. In rats, this actually worked. The cataracts improved. Let me say that again so it sinks in. Scientists genetically reprogrammed a living lens to fix itself. That is not science fiction. That is a published study from last year. Still very early, still years away from being tested in humans. But if you're wondering whether the future of medicine is going to look nothing like the past, this is your answer. And the question for every single one of these experimental approaches, from EDTA to VP1001 to mRNA therapy to the drop being tested in California right now, is exactly the same. Can it produce meaningful, reliable, reproducible improvement in real human patients living real human lives? Because ultimately, that is the only test that matters. So while we all wait for the science to catch up to the headlines, is there anything actually proven right now, today, that you can do to protect yourself from cataracts? Yes, there are 5 things. 5 simple, evidence-based habits that could genuinely delay the day when someone like me needs to see you in the operating room. And I want you to write these down. Number 1, do not smoke. If you smoke, quit. Smoking is one of the most consistently associated risk factors for cataract formation in the entire medical literature. The chemicals in cigarette smoke accelerate the exact type of oxidative damage inside the lens that we've been talking about this whole video. And smoking damages every part of your eye, not just the lens. Number 2, if you have diabetes, work closely with your medical team to keep your blood sugar controlled. Uncontrolled diabetes accelerates cataract formation dramatically. Sometimes patients develop cataracts decades earlier than they otherwise would have. And once diabetic cataracts start, they can progress with terrifying speed. Number 3, protect your eyes from ultraviolet light. Wear good quality UV blocking sunglasses whenever you're outside, especially in the middle of the day, and especially if you live somewhere sunny. Not the cheap gas station glasses with a sticker on them, real UV protection. Cataracts are, in many ways, a disease of accumulated ultraviolet damage over decades of your life. Number 4, be thoughtful about steroid exposure. Steroids are incredibly useful medications. Sometimes they are absolutely necessary. Sometimes they save lives. But long-term steroid use, especially oral steroids and inhaled steroids used chronically, is strongly associated with cataract development. Please, please, never stop a medically necessary steroid on your own based on this video. But do have a real conversation with your doctor about the risks and about whether the dose can safely be minimized. Number 5, get regular, comprehensive eye exams. Because I'll tell you a secret, blurry vision isn't always a cataract. It can be glaucoma, which slowly steals your peripheral vision without you noticing until it's too late. It can be macular degeneration, which destroys your central vision. It can be diabetic retinopathy. It can be a corneal disease. And some of these conditions are only treatable if they're caught early. Sometimes I meet patients who assume their vision loss was just getting older, and by the time they come to see me, we've missed the window to save their sight. Don't let that be you. So the question everyone's been waiting for: is this new eye drop going to be the end of cataract surgery? An actual drop instead of a scalpel? Well, maybe, but not today, not this year, and probably not next year either. If you have a visually significant cataract right now that's stopping you from driving or reading or seeing your grandchildren's faces clearly, do not cancel your surgery appointment based on a headline about a clinical trial that just started. Surgery remains a proven, safe, effective treatment when cataracts are stealing your vision and your quality of life. I do not want you sitting at home for another 2 years, waiting for a miracle drop that may or may not exist, while your world slowly goes dark. That is not a trade-off worth making. But should we be paying extremely close attention to this trial? Absolutely. This is exactly the kind of rigorous, well-designed study that our field has been desperate for. And here is my personal checklist as a working ophthalmologist of the 5 things this drop absolutely has to demonstrate before I get excited. Number 1, show us the drug actually reaches the lens, not just the surface of the eye. The lens itself in measurable concentrations in real human patients. Number 2, show us the cataract objectively changes, not just subjectively feels better. Show us measurable, quantifiable improvements on standardized imaging. Number 3, show us patients function better in real life. Better vision, fewer glare complaints, ability to drive at night again. Real, everyday, functional improvements. Number 4, show us the effect lasts. 6 months, a year, 2 years. Because a treatment that clears the lens temporarily and then lets the cataract come roaring back is not a real treatment. And number 5, the one that could sink everything else. Show us it's safe, not just for a few months, for years, for decades, because we would be putting this drop into millions of aging eyes. And there is one thing about that safety question that most people watching this video have never considered. Something that could quietly end this entire experiment before it even gets a chance to succeed. The eye is not a forgiving organ. It is one of the most delicate structures in the entire human body, and it responds to chemical stress in ways that other tissues do not. Because unlike your skin, your gut, or your muscles, the eye cannot regenerate. What you damage inside the eye stays damaged, forever. And that's the shadow hanging over every single cataract drop being tested right now. If this molecule interacts with the cornea in the wrong way, we could see corneal toxicity. If it changes the fluid dynamics inside the eye, we could see elevated pressure, which means glaucoma. If it triggers inflammation in the wrong compartment, we could see permanent damage to the retina. Millions of people using a drop every single day for years is a very different safety profile than 40 patients using it for 4 months. And the history of ophthalmology is unfortunately full of drops that looked wonderful in small trials and then quietly caused problems that only appeared years later when the damage was already done. So I want you to understand something about how this trial in California is going to unfold. It's going to take years, not months, years. First, they need to confirm safety in this pilot phase. Then, if all goes well, they need to expand into larger Phase 2 trials, then even larger Phase 3 trials, sometimes involving thousands of patients across dozens of medical centers. Then the data has to be reviewed by the FDA, which takes many more months. Then, if everything is approved, the drop has to be manufactured at scale, distributed to pharmacies, and priced in a way that patients can actually afford. So if you're sitting there watching this video, hoping that by next Christmas, you'll be able to walk into your local drugstore and pick up a bottle of miracle cataract drops, I have to tell you honestly, that timeline is not realistic. We are looking at years, possibly a decade, maybe longer. But here's the flip side, and this is what keeps me hopeful. Because if these results hold up, if the trial in California succeeds, if the follow-up trials succeed, if safety is confirmed, then this could be one of the most important changes in cataract treatment in decades, possibly in centuries. Because cataract surgery, in its earliest form, dates back thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian and Indian physicians were performing crude versions of cataract removal as far back as 800 BC. For nearly 3 millennia, the only way to treat this disease has been to physically remove the damaged lens. 3,000 years of the same fundamental approach. Refined, modernized, made safer, made faster, but fundamentally unchanged. And now, for the first time in human history, we might be on the verge of treating cataracts biochemically instead of surgically. Do you understand how big that is? Do you feel the weight of that possibility? So yes, if this drop works, and I mean genuinely works in the way the company hopes it does, it would mean fewer surgeries for surgeons like me. And I want to be completely honest with you about that. That would financially cost me and thousands of my colleagues quite a bit. Cataract surgery is a substantial portion of what I do every week. But you know what? I would be genuinely, completely fine with that. Because at the end of the day, I did not spend 11 years of my life training to become an eye surgeon so that I could preserve my own income. I became an eye surgeon because I wanted to save people's sight. And if a drop can do that better than my hands can, then a drop should do it. Full stop. That's what medicine is supposed to be about. Now here's what I want you to take away from this video, because I know it was long and we covered a lot of ground together. First, do not believe every miracle cure you see online, especially the ones that promise to dissolve cataracts with something you can buy at a grocery store. Anatomy tells us that most of these cures are physically impossible. Second, understand that real science moves slowly. It is placebo-controlled.